with some flair. Mortal flesh is so fallible. Time to up the stakes. Shadow, until next time.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to one of my personal favorites, and that is the Tri-Stack build archetype. I've been playing one of these about every league for probably the past year, and essentially, it's all about stacking 3 attributes for massive benefit. With Inquisitor, the basically main building block of does this character function starts out with Righteous Providence. I've tried a lot of different versions. I tried a Jug version. I've tried some different things, but for me, Righteous Providence has always felt pretty much mandatory to make this build work. It gives you 50 flat strength, 50 flat int, and then it gives you the most important thing is, which it pretty much guarantees you're gonna get good crit chance, because when we have 1,000 int and 1,000 strength, that translates into 1,000% crit chance. It basically fixes crit chance by itself. Essentially, if you have a skill that's like 6% base crit, that translates to 66% crit chance. You add a little bit of extra base crit with like an Assassin's Mark, Brittle Ground, Frost Shield, whatever it is, you start adding a little bit of base crit, all of a sudden you're pretty much getting crit capped along with a very solid, I don't have to think about investing into crit, and that saves passives, which means you can focus on a tree like this, where we're pretty much traveling around the planet. And believe it or not, although this might look like a bad passive tree, it might look like we're just spending all of our time traveling, it's actually pretty dang efficient. As we're going on through this tree, we pick up very important things. Iron Will gives us 1% spell damage per 5 strength. So with 1,000 strength, that's 200% damage. And with Battle Mage's Cry, we proc this whenever we're next to a boss. We want to do some single target. That gives 20 max power if you're next to just one boss, and that equates to 100% of your spell damage applying to your attack damage. So we get 200% damage there. Then we follow that up as we're going through this tree. I'm playing Molten Strike, but this build can also be played with Lightning Strike, and I'll showcase it. Honestly, you probably can play with it pretty much any attack skill you want to, but I am invested into proj stuff. So anyways, I spec to point blank, and then I pick up another mastery here, which is 1% per 5 of your lowest. With 1k, 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 that's another 200% damage. And then you follow that up with a Cyclopean Coil, 1% per 5 lowest, that's another 200% damage. So even though we have a tree where we don't particularly get a lot of percent damage increases on this tree, we get a little bit from like here, we get a little bit from over here, we still have a good amount of percent damage, and that allows us to focus on what we're focusing on, which is stacking our attributes. You'll see with Magebane and just this cluster here, we are suppression capped, which is pretty nice. And then we also have a good amount of evasion. So even though we're grabbing Magebane, which makes our dex not give us evasion, we can grab a mastery like this one right here, which makes our intelligence apply 1% per 5 to our evasion. So even then, we can still get a pretty healthy 20k evasion. You add in a Watcher's Eye that has flat evade chance. You add in the fact we have a 5% blind, which this is basically 100% blind because we're hitting so many times a second that basically every enemy is blinded, and it starts to be a pretty healthy amount of evasion. On top of that, it pairs nicely with Ghost Dance. On top of that, we have Inquisitor regen. I love Pious Path, and it's one of my favorite ways to use Calm Spirit. I think Calm Spirit is basically bar none the best attack-based gloves you can use. It gives you berserk uptime, especially if you have good regen. And the one big downside is, how do you get good sustain while making your regen not there? Because this is returning your life regen into rage regen. Well, with an Inquisitor, that ES regen is still being applied, so things like blood rage or other degens you run into are kind of negated. For the most part, this is something where it would feel bad if you start taking degen damage and you can't go hit an enemy for that leech or life gain on hit. And it helps for some of those instances where a boss is in some sort of ad phase or something and the boss gets to attack you, but you can't defend yourself. And I think it pairs greatly, and it actually feels pretty good. On top of that, we do have a lot of ES gain on hit from here, and a lot of life gain on hit from our 2 Hand of Wisdom action claws. In combination with all of that, I am using Nimbus, because Nimbus essentially just doubles the amount of times your Molten Strike projectiles hit. And we have a lot of Molten Strike projectiles. You'll see if I hover over my skill right now, it says fires 12 projectiles. If those hit twice, I'm getting 24 hits. Now, Molten Strike has the damage effectiveness of, I think it's about 180%, and the Molten Strike balls will hit for half of that, so it's 90% per ball. But essentially, every time I hit the enemy, if I'm getting all 24 of those hits, I'm getting over 1,000% in terms of effective damage. from this skill because that's how well Nimbus pairs with it. For our expenses, if you're wondering how expensive is this build, the main expenses are from pretty much 3 main sources. Nimbus, which is about 15 divines, unless it's changed in the past 2 days. And then we have 2 additional Proj tattoos, which were about 7 or 8 divines when I bought them. That is the majority of the cost of that build. That's 30 divines up front. You could play with just Nimbus and drop these 2 Projes initially, but you're going to start adding in that cost. Also, one more semi-expensive thing is I did pay for a lab enchant service for +2 Proj. That cost me 5 divines. So like if you're thinking about what do I invest in first, what I would invest into first would probably be the lab enchant service and forgo the extra passive point investment for these other things here, for these +2. Like wait to do this until you can afford the +2 Projes and stuff. But outside of that, Astromentus is not particularly expensive. Hand and Wisdom of Action are about a 1 divine to 2 divine investment, depending on how good of a roll you get. I actually got a pretty good roll here, so this one cost me a little bit more. But for the most part, I was playing with my 1 divine claw for, I think, about 95% of my playthrough. I just bought this last night. And then I couldn't really justify buying the attack crit corruption on Calm Spirit because it was like 5 divines. So I bought this, which was like 100C, and I thought was pretty good because it has some attack speed, and that works out great for us. You can also go for % life or some other corruption that is not super expensive. Frenzy's obviously good, but that's going to be expensive, I believe. And then we have a Cyclopean Coil, and we have a Fractal Thoughts with 90% reservation. Fractal Thoughts 90% reservation is about 1 to 2 div right now. I can't promise the market will stay that way. If you do end up not being able to get a 90% reservation corruption on this, if this gets too expensive, all you have to do is grab Mind Drinker and 12% reservation efficiency here. I will say the roll on your socket walls does matter a little bit. You kind of want a decent reservation efficiency and you want decent attributes. Those are 2 rolls that kind of matter for you. If the reservation is too low, then you're going to have to get like an Enlightened 4. I just have an Enlightened 3, but if you... Well, I don't know. You should definitely be able to get a pretty good Sockwell's... What am I saying? A Sockwell's Nest with like a perfect roll should be cheaper than an Enlightened 4. So like, definitely just get a decent roll with the Sockwell's Nest and you should be chilling. Outside of that, the only gear pieces we craft was our ring and our boots. Essentially what we were going for is just basically, I was just doing essence spam until I hit like int or dex or yeah, pretty much just interdex. I didn't really care too much. You could do crit multi essence spamming, but I was just going for some attributes. On this one, I hit some okay int, and then I hit life and wed with it, and I just settled. I was like, that's pretty good. I'm going to call it a day on that. You could also go for, basically, once you hit that perfect other attribute, do a wild versatile matron, that will get you the life, and then you can benchcraft wed. I'm not sure I need this mana cost mod on it. It's just what I crafted initially, and I didn't actually check if I needed it, so I might change that to damage at some point when I actually test it. But that's the ring craft. And then for the boot craft, I did a fractured either strength or int, and then do spamming on I would recommend a strength int version of the boots. And then I would recommend spamming essentially hollow fossil, fundamental fossil, and on top of that, you want the sanctified fossil, I think, to have a higher chance of rolling the higher tier int or strength you're looking for. It's important to get strength and int on these gear pieces, so that way our split personalities can be strength dex. The reason for this is currently on trade, the split personalities with strength int are 5 divines, and the split personalities with strength dex are like 25 chaos. I think it's worth spamming a few extra essences to try to get int instead of dex and get strength or int instead of dex, because that way we still can get fairly balanced attributes without destroying ourselves in terms of cost on split personalities, because the strength int ones are very expensive. There's a lot of pretty meta builds that use them, whereas this one we only really can get away with strength and dex and it works just fine. I will say this, my attributes are not balanced 100% correctly. Ideally with this build, you want strength to be the highest, then dex, then int. The reason for that is you get benefits based on your dex and your strength being higher than your int. So for example, we get crit multi for dex being higher, we get % strength if strength is higher than int, so we get benefits based on our int being the lowest. And then on Cyclopean Coil, we get freeze immunity from dex being higher than int, and we would get ignite immunity if our strength was higher than our dex. So right now we just don't have ignite immunity. It's fine. We have a lot of sustain. If we're attacking an enemy, our sustain is off the charts with how many hits we get and our life gain on hit and our ES gain on hit. But for currently, right now we're not ignite immune, so that's a little bit annoying. Not the end of the world. All right, let's go ahead and get into a map. Let me showcase what this build looks like. I will say right now I do have an Oriath's End. Essentially, I'm not sure this is actually even mandatory. Let me just grab a Bismuth real quick just to showcase the contrast in clear. I think my thought process was, I have 400% generic damage. It would probably feel good to have this on for clear, but I don't think it's really necessary. I think we hit most things on the screen. So let's go ahead and throw on just a regular bismuth. We'll just click reuse at the end here. This should have enough sustain, I think, at this level of floss. We'll just roll for like reduced charges used or charge recovery real quick. One of those two mods, and it should be perfectly sustained. Reduced effect, we're not going to want to do that because we are a little bit, duration should work. Okay, so we have these. Let's go ahead and get into this Minotaur map, and I'll showcase what this build looks like while we're mapping. Give you a little bit of context for the character. This is no Orion now. The reason I took that out is I don't believe it to be a necessary part of this build for clear at all. And quite frankly, it just adds a lot of cost that I don't think the build really needs. And on top of that, if I wanted to, well, actually I should do this right now. I'm thinking about it. I keep forgetting I didn't do this, but the other upside is you could craft regen on this, which would make your ES sustain higher, and it would make your rage regen higher. So I think, quite frankly, this is probably just better than the Uriah's End, just because the more consistency on the regen, because I don't really feel like the Uriah's End was making or breaking our clear, per se, if that makes sense. Got a speech right here, which is kind of nice. Probably shouldn't have grabbed that, because it makes our projects not overlap, and it's going to make us a little bit faster than we should be. So I do have Molten Strike, Val Molten Strike. For the most part, I don't think this is... You just kind of use it sometimes when you want a little bit extra clear, or I think it does give you a nice chunkier hit on the boss, but for the most part, I forget about it most of the time. But I'll wait for the speed trying to wear off just so we don't have the skewed context of how fast we kill a boss. I'll just let that wear off real quick here, and then we'll go in and we'll actually fight the boss. I don't want to have that on. This character, I have set up more expensive gear, and after doing it, it was one of those things where I'm like, man, I spent a lot of money, and I'm not sure it's better. I think the nicer setup of gear I have is technically better, but then I was like, why advertise a build that's 50 divines more expensive when the build without those extra investments is, quite frankly, pretty insane? So I was very, what's the word? I didn't want to, like, I wanted to do the showcase with the setup I have here. I'll give you a little look-see at the gear on that I made that was more upgrade. I got a 1% per 25 dex grasp me mail. I got a suppression shield, which allowed me to drop suppression here, and I moved my Balbala over here to get more basically benefit from mods. The unfortunate part is I lost Ghost Dance. I'm not even sure that was worth it. But getting that bigger shield gave me, you know, a decent amount more evasion. I was able to get closer to 3,500 ES. A little bit higher life. There was like things that were upgrades to it. But ultimately, it took a lot more to invest into. I needed to get Enlightened 4. I needed to get Anomalous Blood Rage. It was adding all this cost. I even had a 3 rat that I made, which is like, this adds a whole bunch of expensive things that, quite frankly, the build doesn't need. So I think for the most part, I'm probably just going to advertise this setup of the version. I might showcase a video of the higher end stuff, but for right now, I like this. Oh, and what I wanted to showcase here also was that you could just swap in Lightning Strike, even with Nimbus, with all these extra projects we have. It's not as good of damage as Molten Strike. Molten Strike has those crazy overlapping hits and multiple, like, extra DPS numbers because of it. Oh, I didn't take out Molten Strike. Whoops. Let me go ahead and do that correctly. But the thing about Lightning Strike is if you just wanted a build that's more of a clear speed monster, you just want to cruise, you just want to go fast, Lightning Strike is actually kind of that thing. It's omnidirectional targeting that goes off screen and hits things that you're not even like looking at, right? Like I'm not like, it's one of those things where I'm not thinking at all what my character's aiming at or what my character's doing. The stuff just dies. I don't have an MTX for Lightning Strike. It obviously looks better without the base MTX, but I think the base looks pretty decent. Honestly, compared to what it used to look like back when I made the Hateforge Pathfinder build, I think this is a strict upgrade in terms of like what Lightning Strike itself looked like. At least I think it is visually. I do remember when we did the Val Lightning Strike Pathfinder, because we could just overlap Val Lightning Strike on Val Lightning Strike on Val Lightning Strike. It was visually very, very painful to look at. It was one of those builds that destroyed the bit rate. It just melted your eyes with just the bright light. But I think this is a little bit more reserved, and it works out pretty well, I think. So let's go ahead and do this Hydra. You can see here, substantially less DPS, right? We melted the Minotaur in split seconds. Granted, there, when I was doing that, I think I forgot to do my Battle Mage's Cry, so I was missing out on a sizable amount of percent damage scaling. Obviously, we hit him a lot harder that second, like, run through there. But the context is Lightning Strike, much better clear. If you want to just do mapping or somewhere, it's still enough damage to just still kill a T16 boss very quickly, and it's much better clear. Molten Strike, much higher DPS, and it's a pretty simple gem swap. I don't have an enchant for Lightning Strike, but I think it works better for clear regardless. And on top of that, I don't have the Val version of Lightning Strike. The alt quality with the Pierce for the Val version was like really expensive. I didn't want to buy into it. I think it's necessary to have this alt quality for the Pierce. Potentially what you could do is you could invest into some Pierce here. Maybe that's justifiable. I don't really want to spend the points, but if you were wanting to do a Val Lightning Strike on a more regular basis, it'd be worth it to probably invest into the Pierce, and that way you wouldn't have to buy the expensive alt quality Lightning Strike just to get the Pierce, and you could have a Val Lightning Strike, which is a big DPS upgrade. If we were able to pop in here, put down our Val Lightning Strikes and attack like normally, we probably would have shredded the Hydra pretty quickly too. Granted, we had Val Molten Strike when we were attacking the Minotaur. I don't think it makes that much of a difference for Molten Strike. I'm not really sure, to be honest, but that's like the context or whatever. All right, anyways, this is my Tri-Stacker. Hopefully you guys like this video on it. I've done a Tri-Stacker pretty much every league, and I think I'm getting better at perfecting how to make this sort of build archetype every time. I love it. It's got such smooth defensive layers. We get suppress cap very easily. We get good evasion. We get ghost dance. We get leech. We get life gain on hit. We have regen. We have fortify. We have high uptime on berserk for less damage taken. It's just a nice combination of things that I just always like making these characters. I've made them as cast on crit characters. I made it as a bow character this league. Last league, I might actually showcase this sort of setup just with like Tornado Shot, just because of how free it is with these +2 projects I'm already investing into. There's probably a setup on this build with Tornado Shot without changing like pretty much any tree, just changing to Widow Hail, changing to Poised Prism, and I'm sure the build actually kind of just destroys. For example, I'll probably showcase that, but I can highly recommend this. Tri-Stackers, I think they're fantastic. I hope it catches on more with people, that more people start trying them out, because I really, really like to share them. I think they're a fantastic build archetype. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Peace out. Take care. See you guys next time.